Right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the California State Library's Government Publications section for a special program on Colonel Allensworth State Historic Park with Lori Weir from California State Parks. My name is Emily Blodgett, and I am the host of today's event. I'm a librarian in the Government Publications section at the California State Library. Our moderator, Emily Mackinson, is also a librarian in the Government Publications section. She will be monitoring our Q&A section for any questions you may have, and we'll read your questions during our Q&A session at the end of the presentation. The California State Library is thrilled to partner with California State Parks to present today's program. We're also pleased to partner with California State Parks for our California State Library Parks Pass, which allows library patrons to check out passes from their local public libraries for free vehicle day use entry to participating state parks, including Colonel Allensworth State Historic Park. Before we start, I have a bit of housekeeping to go over. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the Q&A section. We will answer them at the end of the program. This presentation will be recorded and made available on the California State Library's YouTube channel. We will email the link to everyone who has registered. Live transcription is enabled. Click the CC icon to show the captions. If you run into any technical difficulties during the program, please let us know in the Q&A section and we will help troubleshoot. Also, we have added links related to the California State Library, California State Library Parks Pass, and Colonel Allensworth State Historic Park in the chat window. For any state employees who don't yet have a California State Library card, please consider applying for one through the online application link. Now that we have that out of the way, let's meet our speaker today. Lori Weir is the District Interpretive Program Manager who coordinates public programs and staff for 11 parks in the California State Parks Great Basin District. Before starting her career with California State Parks nearly 4 years ago, she worked as a curator of collections at the Kern County Museum and Pioneer Village in Bakersfield. Lori spent the first 10 years of her career working as an archaeologist throughout California and the Great Basin. Since 2013, she has served as a committee member for the Public History Institute at California State University, Bakersfield. In 2017, Lori was presented an Individual Award of Merit from the Conference of California Historical Societies and a California State Legislature Assembly Certificate of Recognition for her work promoting California history. Lori will be joined today by her colleague, Jerelyn Oliveira. Please join me in welcoming Lori and Jerelyn.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Colonel Allensworth State Historic Park. Colonel Allensworth State Historic Park is located in southwest Tulare County in the heart of California's Great Central Valley, and it's located along Highway 43. The nearest town would be either Early Mart or Delano. For any of you who are interested in visiting the park, we are having an annual rededication of the park this Saturday from 10 until 4. The admission is $10. And we welcome you all to join us in person for that event. A little bit of history about how the park was formed. After the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968, there was a push throughout California to recognize the contributions of African Americans to our state's development and history. And so the San Francisco Historical Society, Oakland Historical Society, and Los Angeles Historical Societies were contacted and requested to look at some of the history of the area and the contributions of African Americans to California's history, and suggest various historical sites that could become a state park. And Colonel Allensworth ended up being the site that was selected to become a state historic park. The park was established in 1974, and by 1976, it was dedicated in October, and that's why we have what we call the annual rededication event, which is coming up this Saturday. The State Historic Park honors the town of Allensworth, which was established in 1908 by the California Colony and Home Promoting Association. And there were 5 men, including Colonel Allen Allensworth, who formed that association, looking for an area where African Americans could live free from the discrimination of the Jim Crow era, and also that they could have self-determination and gain economic independence through agricultural economy and things like that. And so at this point, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Jerelyn Oliveira, and she's going to tell you a little bit about Colonel Allensworth himself. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So a little bit about Colonel Allen Allensworth. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble with my mic. There we go. So I think I'll stand over on this side. So Allen Allensworth was born into slavery in 1842 in Louisville, Kentucky. He escaped slavery during the American Civil War in the 1860s, and by joining the Union Navy during that conflict. Now, after the war was over and all slaves were free, he did something that he had always wanted to do as a child, which was get an education. With that education, he became a teacher and an ordained minister. In the 1880s, as being a minister, he was writing letters, and other people were writing letters on his behalf, because all African American units of the U.S. Army had white chaplains, and they felt they needed Black chaplains. So Reverend Allensworth was then appointed to the 24th Infantry as their chaplain by President Grover Cleveland. Now, by this time, he was married and had daughters, and we will meet his wife and daughters as we go through our program today in several different ways. But they followed him around to all of the Army posts that he went through during his travels through the United States and the Indian territories. When he retired in 1906, he was the highest ranking Black man and the highest ranking chaplain at the time. And like I mentioned, he had traveled all over the US, and he saw that African Americans were free, but not equal. And so he wanted to start a town where other like-minded people, other African Americans, could come and live without that discrimination. So where we are standing at today is the parlor of the reconstructed home of Colonel Allensworth and his wife, Josephine. Like I mentioned, we do have some slides that we are going to be showing you some photos. So at one point, again, we will see those pictures of the Colonel and his wife. But where I'm at is the parlor, which is like the living room. This is a small, nice house. It was a prefabricated home built in 1911 originally. And there is a bedroom, parlor, kitchen, and a dining room. And so again, he lived here until he passed away in 1914 when he was killed when struck by a motorcycle down in Monrovia, California. And Josephine did come back and forth between their home in Los Angeles and here in Allensworth periodically up until the time that she passed away in 1939. So like I said, we had some slides. We're also going to show you pan around and look into the separate rooms here of the home. So again, parlor, simple. This is a time period without any electricity for our community. This community did not receive electricity until 1923 or plumbed water until much later than that. So if you can imagine being in a home like this, and now as we're getting a little darker going into these winter months, how would you light your home? How would you get your water? Where would you use the restroom? How would you cook? All of those things are good questions to think about as we, again, move through the park today. So as you're looking in here, here's a bedroom. Just the Colonel and his wife lived here. Now, like I mentioned, they have 2 daughters, Eva and Nella. They did not live here. They were already grown and married. And just as a side note, as their married names was Eva Skanks and Nella Blodgett. So, and then their grandchildren have helped us get the park back, or get the community running up as a park. And so again, here's a little bit of the bedroom. Simple things that are needed. The trunks and stuff were what used, no closets in the time period. So use trunks or armoires if to study, to hold your clothes. Here is a nice dining room. Now this is they call it a four-corner style home. So actually there's 4 rooms in which you can go from one door to the next. So you can walk in a complete circle inside of the home. And so in a lot of cases, this room would have been the kitchen and the dining room. There would have been 2 bedrooms and the parlor. But again, because the daughters didn't live here, they had a separate kitchen and a dining room. So you could imagine coming and having a supper meal with the Allensworths while they were here in Allensworth too. Mrs. Allensworth was on the school board and the Women's Improvement League. And then of course, the correspondence that the Colonel would have been doing with other chaplains, with the churches that he was involved with in Monrovia. And then again, any correspondence with soldiers who might want to come and live here at Allensworth. Small kitchen. I think I mentioned this was a prefabricated home. So it was purchased most likely from Sears and Roebuck. And so it's kind of like you can just put it together. All the in large crates, they would deliver it by train, and then it would be brought here to the site and put together, kind of like something that you would buy from IKEA. Now, again, this was Sears Roebuck's, and if anybody can imagine, Sears and Roebuck's is like Amazon of the day. You could buy anything and everything from the Sears Roebuck catalog, from the smallest item like a can opener to one of the larger items like a home. So we're gonna head on out of the house, or okay, look there. If anybody has a guess, we can, that is a refrigerator, or what we'd like to call an icebox. That's what it would have been called for the time period. And again, no electricity. So you were very reliant on the train to bring your ice deliveries every day in the summertime and maybe every couple of days in the wintertime. They got their ice deliveries from Bakersfield. So I think doing slides. Okay, so there's Josephine and the Colonel. A nice photo of them. And then the next photos are of of their daughters. Like I mentioned, Eva is the young lady without the hat on the left, and Nella is their second daughter with the hat. That's easier to describe them. So this is a front-facing view of the Colonel's house. That was probably one of the earlier pictures of the time when, again, around the time period of 1911, 1912, when it was first put in here. We were reconstructed. This house is a reconstructed original. So again, built in 1911, used over the years, but it had been abandoned for quite a while. And then as we reconstructed it, we did the reconstruction in 1980. So it was the second home to be reconstructed, or the second building to be reconstructed in the park. The first one was the schoolhouse, which is where we are headed next. So as we're walking along, we are going to show you some slides as we go. Also, as you're seeing any of the live shot here of the buildings, a couple little white houses you see in the distance are a couple residential homes, the Hackett and Stockett. But you'll also see how very open, how very flat, and how very dry we are. We are, like Lori mentioned, down in the southern Tulare County, in the southern portion of the Central Valley. We are part of the Great Basin, or excuse me, the Tulare Lake Basin. So we are on that southern edge, very hot and very dry. So the photo that you just saw of that young lady had the Colonel's house there in the back. She was one of their neighbors, Irene Phillips. Here is a 1915 photo taken up near the railroad tracks. So they called it a bird's eye view. They were standing on top of a grain warehouse when they took this photo. And believe it or not, it's hard to see in that photo, but all of the buildings that we now have reconstructed here in the park are in that photograph. And the historians, the researchers, the archaeologists, everybody who was involved did a really good job at getting the park to look like the town. And here's a sign that would have been out near the railroad tracks. These are north-south running tracks for at the time, the Santa Fe lines. Now it is Burlington Northern Santa Fe. We are at a siding, so there's two tracks, because again, we had a large warehouse, grain storage, I think. Is that our next photo? It's kind of faint in there, but that warehouse held up to 50,000 sacks of grain. It was one of the largest on these tracks because all of the grain, like oats and wheat, alfalfa, and then one of the biggest cash crops, sugar beets, were all being stored, moved into that warehouse, and then being distributed out by those north-south lines of Santa Fe. So there were very busy railroad tracks here at the time. And one that lives here and works here in this park for a long time, they're very busy tracks now also. So here is a historic photo of the schoolhouse. We're going to be heading into that building shortly, but it is our most original building. Like I said, it was reconstructed in '79, but it was originally built in 1912. It's a two-room schoolhouse, all 8 grades. Education meant so much to this community that kids actually started going to school in someone's home as it was being built. Then they moved into their one-room schoolhouse, which was then turned into the library. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then they built their two-room schoolhouse. The schoolhouse was fantastic. It was used all the way up until 1972. So let's see. And here is William Payne. William Payne was the first teacher and principal for this community, and he taught here between 1910 to up to about 1920. And his, again, teacher, principal, all 8 grades. He taught in both the small one-room schoolhouse and this larger two-room schoolhouse. And then the ladies there are some of the ladies from the town. But the one on the far right is Margaret Prince. And she was one of William Payne's first, I forgot the words I'm looking for. So she was one of his first assistants. So I'm going to walk up the stairs here. Kind of a funny angle, but welcome to the school. Again, this is kind of our crown jewel of the park. So the slide that you're seeing now is some of the school children taken about 1913. So with a little bit of that, I think the building they're standing next to is the old one-room schoolhouse. And so before they moved, or at the time they were moving into this building. And you'll see all the girls are dressed in skirts, the boys are all in short pants. That was very much the fashion of the time. So, but they loved going to school here. They were accepted because everybody looked alike. They looked like their teacher. Their teacher was very much at making sure that when they were in the classroom, they were doing what they were supposed to, learning their reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography, Black history, agriculture, penmanship, you name it, they were doing it in the classroom. But when they went outside, then they got to shake off the wiggles, get out and be kids, and the teacher would get out there with them. He would play tag and marbles with the boys, and he would play jacks with the girls. It was even once said that he cheated. One of the young ladies who went to school here all those many years ago, when she came back, and this was in the early 2000s, she made a remark about how when they were playing jacks, that William Payne, Professor Payne is what they called him, cheated. So he made sure that the kids were getting their schooling, learning what they needed to learn to go on and become viable members of the communities they would once live in, but then that they were also children and having fun and enjoying the time that they were having here in Allensworth. So this is one of the classrooms. There's two of them, again, one on the other side of this wall here. It is set up to be 1915. Teacher's desk at the front, student's desk in the back with all of the books and tools that they would need. So you have your slates and your ink pens and even a little water cup that you would need. Because again, no running water. You had to go outside for everything. The flag that you just saw in the frame there is a 48-star flag, because again, two states do not become states until the 1950s. So this school would have had 48 stars on their flags. So we're going to head out from the school here and we're going to head over to the school. Oh, wait, the library or the school. I don't know. We'll figure it out once we get there. But what you're looking at now is a map of the Tulare Lake. Now, I mentioned earlier how big, wide, open, flat we are in the Tulare Lake Basin. And if any of you have been listening to the news over this past winter, with the unprecedented flooding that we had, the Tulare Lake made a resurgence. And you can kind of, again, see in the smaller screen of us there, big, wide open expanse to the north. The Tulare Lake was one of the largest freshwater lakes west of the Mississippi in the days. The last they saw the lake here before Allensworth was built in 1908 was, I think, 1899. Does that seem correct, Lori? Yes, I'm getting the thumbs up for that. So then it's had a couple resurgence, once I think in the 30s, once again in the 90s, and then just recently, 2023. So this photograph is of Oscar and Cora Auvert. Now, Oscar Auvert was part of the, I think he was with the during the Spanish-American War. But here he was in Allensworth. He was a prominent citizen. Not only was he the first elected Black justice of the peace in California, but he was also instrumental in helping get the Baptist church built here in the community. The colonel started it, but unfortunately he died before he was able to secure everything he needed to build the building. So Oscar Auvert and another gentleman named Nimrod Rainbow, the gentleman
Oh, looks like we've frozen for a minute here. Hopefully they'll be back in just a second as the reception comes back. So hold tight for a few seconds and we'll see what we can do.
Okay. We had a little bit of technical difficulties there. Sorry about that. So I don't know. I think we Dotson, but just to kind of go over that again, he was the first elected constable of the community. His wife was the beautician, Louise. They ran a restaurant and a livery stable. They, when they left 1920, and they ran a saloon up in the town of Fresno. As you're looking, we're almost looking due east here. If you're looking at our smaller, the gross drugstore, but on very clear days, and actually I can almost see it, you probably can't, is the outline of the Sierra Nevada mountains. So on very good clear days, we are in a great spot to see the Sierra Nevadas, the Coast Range to our west, and we have some great areas. If anybody likes to do stargazing, this is the place to do it. We have very little light pollution out here. So hopefully you can come down and check out our night skies. The building we are walking up to next, I think, is on the slide. It is the historic library, which again was the one-room schoolhouse. So Mrs. Allensworth, when they got the money to build the two-room schoolhouse, she got the money and the property, and she had one of the local men of the community, Abraham Stockett, to tear down the old tear down the old one-room schoolhouse, which was over to the east of us, and move it to this property here, and she built the library. And her whole intention of that was, one, because again, education was one of the most important things to this community, but it was also for a worthy young woman to have a job. So the women were very integral parts of this community. Ethel Hall was our first librarian, and then Bertie Phillips, I think Louise Dotson, and Sarah Heinzman were all librarians at some point in time also. So let's go inside and see what our library looked like. Now, we were part of the Tulare County Free Library System. And so what you needed for a library was a table, some chairs, and some shelves to put books on. So from the looks of it, I think we succeeded in that. To reemphasize again, all African-American community, no electricity. This was your entertainment. You came here, you could get the book selections that were popular of the day, and you could read any of those fiction and nonfiction that they were bringing in. Probably about once a month, there was some rotation needed for your schoolwork, because the children from the school were required to come to the library to use all of those reference books for their homework. And the gentlemen and ladies would come here again for those pleasure reading materials, but also for periodicals, newspapers of the day. This is where they would have learned when the finally came out into the world. 1912, the Titanic sank. And in, say, 1915, Mount Lassen up in Northern California erupted. And so again, through those periodicals and newspapers, this is where they would have found out those bits of information. So from here, we're going to head out. So we're going to move on up to our next building. And as we move around the town, that's everybody walked in the community. The train was the main source to get you from point A to point B. If you were going far places, the train took 9 hours to get to San Francisco from here, or 9 hours to get to Los Angeles from here. So if you can imagine riding a train for that long. Other forms of transportation were, of course, foot, but horses, buggies, wagons, and the bicycle were all very popular. And looking out into those far expanses. Now, I don't know, because again, it's a small picture, but you're seeing kind of in the is the town of Alpa. And if you can believe it or not, in this big open flat area we're in, that was an island when this was part of the Tulare Lake. So yes, Allensworth would have been underwater if that lake was still here. So moving along, the buildings you kind of see in the distance there is, again, the church. We talked about that earlier. The church was built in 1916, and it was torn down in 1967. Oh, yes. So this building you're seeing here is a complete reconstruction from the ground up. They did that in the year 2000 to 2001. It is what we call a working museum building. So we have had weddings, we have had wakes, we have had church services, and two very exciting things that happened here in the years 2017 and 18, we had naturalization ceremonies. So within that 2 years, a total of 52 people became American citizens in our church here in Allensworth. And they were very fun, exciting days. The families, everybody's so proud to be part of that. So we were glad that we could be a part of it. And hopefully someday, maybe they'll ask us to join again. Any other slides? So also what you're looking at is the drugstore. I think we're gonna take a little walk over to the drugstore, if you can see again in our small photo there. We're also having some technical difficulties with our slides, so I guess we're not getting our slides back. But let's head over, find out what Mary Gross is doing at the drugstore today. This community boasted 3 stores, 2 general merchandise and 1 drugstore. Mary Gross was a certified nurse. She and her partner ran this store. Her partner had a home next door, but we unfortunately don't have his home reconstructed because we just didn't know enough about it. But Mary Gross, she was the person you came to for any of your ailments, from whether you had a pet on your hand or some major tummy troubles or something. But if you needed something big, you would get on the train and go south to Bakersfield. That's where you would head for a doctor. So welcome, come on in to the drugstore. So I'm gonna pan a little bit. You see the type of sundries and she would have sold. Things for the home. Women, you probably still made a lot of your clothing, so you could buy your fabrics and your patterns here. A lot of the smaller things that you would add to your, if you wanted to change your dress up a little bit, there's items in this here that you could add feathers or lace or something to it. And then again, thimbles, needles, anything that you basically needed for the home. On the back wall is all manner of patent medicines and herbs, things that you could mix with alcohols or oils or anything like that in order to make what you needed, or she could make it up for you. She had a poultice that she used for black widow spider bites. Those can sting, and if you're very allergic, those could be very deadly. Black widows is something we have a lot here, so having that salve probably was a good thing. You're looking at some clothing there. This one is actually a slip, or could be the underclothing, or it would go over your chemise and your corset as some outerwear. And then this one is a dress there. And then let's see, what else are we looking at? Things that you might recognize. Something simple and a name you've probably heard before. So, oops, sorry about the thing here, but nice, simple, easy. This is a Bissell sweeper. So just pushing it along, these things will pull up and pick up the dirt off of your carpet. Most everybody had area rugs that they would have on hardwood floors. So Bissell is a name that you know and trust in your vacuuming needs here. I think I just did a plug for Bissell. Something else that I want to show you real quick while we're here. I'm going to open up this little cabinet. I really love this bottle. I don't know how close I'm going to have to get here. But this is a small, tiny bottle of Royal Lime toilet lotion. And most people go, oh my gosh, toilet lotion. What in the world? Toilet water? What is that? But this is a small bottle of cologne. Royal Lime might have been used by women, where Royal Spice would have been used by men. You could actually still buy Royal, all there. I think they had 5 of them of different Royal type, but they do call them colognes now. They don't call them toilet water anymore, but this is a cologne that you would have used in the time. And I like showing that one off. And a Singer sewing machine. Several women had sewing machines, again, making your own clothes. This, what you're looking at now, is a case for patterns, McCall, Butterick. They were very popular and still are actually popular patterns for people to use, especially if you have several children. You can make a top for your oldest, and that then you can hand it down, or those patterns usually have several sizes, so you can use one pattern for several different people. So they were very nice to have. So I think we're going to head out of the drugstore. I'm going to let you go first. Oops. And from here, we're headed down to the neighbor's house. Now we're going to be walking down a street we call Palmer, but in the day, this was probably the most northern street that people used here. There were very few houses, if any, to the north of this street. We are walking east now. So this community was about, from what things that I've read, about 3,000 acres, but only about 800 acres of it was utilized. Like I said, where we're standing is that north end of town. So we had a hotel, a barbershop, several stores, and then a few residents, the school and the church. But all south of us, there was probably 50 or so other homes down there. Most were all residential. You met Oscar O'Vere there earlier. He would have lived a little, and William Payne, they would have lived in that other part of town. There was probably about 200 people who lived in Allensworth at our time period, and it slowly declined into the 1920s. Might have had a small resurgence of people during the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl days, and then the 60s were probably the worst decade for this community. In the 70s, we became a state park and started again bringing this community back to life. The lowest population was probably in the 60s. Like I said, again, that's when all of the businesses were already gone, and very few people were still living in what is now the state park. So the building that you see behind me is the barbershop. Frank Milner moved here. Again, most people moved into this area in between 1910 to 1912. Frank Milner lived in San Francisco during the earthquake of 1906. And when he got here to Allensworth, he wanted a place that was sturdy and strong. So he built basically a concrete house. So that's why if you saw the outside, you were looking at cinder blocks, but he made concrete cinder type blocks to build his home and his shop. So this portion that we're looking at is what his shop was, and then he lived in the rest of the building as his residence. Now the barbershop was for men only. Women did not come into the barbershop. So men and young boys would come, get their shave and a haircut, and then again, pay a little extra for that toilet lotion or toilet water if wanted. But it was also a great place to come to get news, to argue, to gossip, to do whatever they needed to do. And again, a lot of business was probably struck up around in the barbershop. One of the big things, though, to talk about was the sports of the day, which would have been probably boxing and baseball. you're seeing there is Jack Johnson. He was the first African-American heavyweight of the world. And he lived in Bakersfield for a short period of time, but he was very, very much a man who, he did a little bit of dancing. You kind of think of Muhammad Ali. Well, he was the earlier prototype of that. He danced around a little bit. He did some trash talking. So he did things a little bit differently than his counterparts, but there was no denying that he was an excellent boxer. So I can guarantee you they definitely talked about him in this building. So as we head out, we're going to go to the neighbor's house, which was Mrs. Smith. Oh, looks like we got our, all right, we got our thing now. Here is the Smith house. And as you can see, well, Mrs. Smith lived here until 1935. So that photograph was definitely taken after 1935 because she would not have allowed her house to look like that. But it is one of our original homes. So we did do reconstruction on it. Sometime in the early 90s is when this house was reconstructed. So she lived across the street from the hotel next to the Barber. The train is going by right now, so very close to the train tracks. She and her husband, Frank, moved here in 1911. Unfortunately, Frank was still with the military, and while he was stationed at the Presidio in San Francisco, he passed away. So she lived here by herself, but she also boarded her nephews. She had, Frank had some nephews that lived here with her, went to school, and then in the summertime, they moved to Tulare, which is a little bit north of here, in order to live with their father. She had an excellent truck garden. She grew a lot of vegetables, and she had chickens for eggs, and then she sold those items to people here in the community. That's how she supplemented her $12 a month pension that she got from her husband when he passed away. So we are going to head inside of the Smith house. So as we go inside again, this is a four-corner style home. So we'll head into the parlor if I don't trip over everything and really embarrass myself. One thing about the homes, you'll notice that the Colonel's house, you'll notice here and several other houses that we have here in the park, they have pianos. So music was very much part of life. Classical music, like Mrs. Allensworth was a classically trained pianist. Others were probably along the same lines, but then they would have also, young people were listening to the music of the day, and ragtime was becoming very popular going into the jazz age of the 20s. So there was definitely music in all of the homes. Men had brass bands, they had guitars and violins. So picnics, plays at the school, Christmas celebrations, there was enough people here who played music that there was always a lively tune being played here for dancing or for church or for whatever you needed music. Now, if you're anything like me, I gotta have music all the time, so it's nice to whistle while I work. And one of the, we're gonna go into the bedroom, but we'll talk about it, what I was gonna talk in a minute. Bedroom is set up very similar. Like I said, you could walk into this bedroom, walk through the door that's there on that south wall, and end up in another bedroom. So this would have been the master bedroom for Laura. Again, she was probably a very resourceful woman. She was a very well-loved woman of the community, and she was on the cemetery board. She was on the school board at one time, also part of the Women's Improvement League. So there was quite a few things that she was a part of with the community. Small dining room. Again, this would have been a kitchen dining room in the beginning, but she expanded and had a separate kitchen for the dining room. And again, and the boys each had their own bedroom. This little instrument here is a Victrola. So again, I talked about playing music, but people did able to have a portable Victrola or maybe a full standing one where you could play records that were 78s. I think we have one there on the piano. So 78 was one song per side. So if you needed more than two songs, you needed more than one record. And again, you would carry those around with you if you decided to take them on a picnic. So are we gonna go into the kitchen? So let's come on into the kitchen now. And before I open the door, I just want you to see, oop, we went into the bedroom. Sorry about that. I'm gonna show you how really dark it's in here with no windows. So on bright sunny days, we can open this door up, get some really nice light in here to do our cooking. But if we were here on cold, foggy days that we have in the wintertime, she probably had quite a few lamps going to keep this room light enough to work on her coal burning stove. Most all of these stoves that the ones that you've seen so far are coal burning, and they would have, again, in the firebox, this entire compartment was nice and hot, bread warming ovens up here, so a little cooler, but still anything was nice and hot. So you would do all of your cooking. You had a oven and then your stovetop, and you would add coal either in through the firebox or above it. Again, you were cooking the vegetables that you grew or the chickens or hogs that you raised, but then you could also supplement your food with canned items from the Sears Roebuck catalog. We have a really cool, it's one of those weird things. I have to kind of close the door to see it, but this is what's called a Hoosier cabinet. And a Hoosier cabinet had everything you needed. This smaller space right here, oops, was actually a table you could pull out and use. So if you needed a larger working space, there was a hopper. Again, I don't know how much you're able to see in here, but then you would put flour in there for measuring out. You could keep potatoes and onions in a lower bin that was tin lined, had all of your necessary utensils to help you cook and whatever you needed to do here with this Hoosier cabinet. So great use of space, great use of way to do things. Then you clean it all up, put that table back in, and you have the space to do what you needed to do. Laundry was done outside. Bathing was done inside. You bathed here in your kitchen because that's where you got your hot water. You would have done your laundry by heating your water up again on a stove or an outside stove if you had one to do your laundry. In a lot of cases, things were done on a basis like Monday was laundry, Tuesday was ironing, Wednesday was sewing. So you weren't trying to get everything done in the same day because you might have had a lot of it, especially if you had like the Hall family who had 13 children. Now, not all of them lived here in Allensworth, but that's still quite a large family of 15 to be getting food, supplies, laundry, all done in a day for that. So which way are we headed to next? So we're going to head back out the front door here and take a look at the hotel. So you're looking at a historic photo of the hotel. What's that say? Circa 1915. So the hotel, Elizabeth Doherty, who was a wealthy woman from San Francisco, donated the money and the equipment and the men in order to build the hotel. We're not 100% sure, but we don't think she ever actually came to Allensworth. She did hire the proprietors, who the first were Clara and John Morris. So they would have ran the hotel. It was 7 rooms. You paid 75 cents a night. You either did like most hotels nowadays, you could probably make a reservation, or on a first come, first served basis. Clara Morris was known for her Creole cooking. So if she probably served some type of a meal here at the hotel, whether it was a breakfast or a supper. And John Morris was known for being a mechanic. So in a lot of cases on the west side of the building, he could do some mechanic work. He could fix harnesses, saddles, buggy parts, wheels, axles, things like that. So he was quite handy to have here in the community. So this building there was somebody named Phillips. They were a family of a rancher that was way south of this community, that there was a eucalyptus grove to the south. So that's where they had a lot of their big picnics, and the Phillips family, excuse me, was part of that. Now, when this community was in its decline, the Phillips actually bought this hotel and had it moved over onto their property, and it became a bunkhouse for his ranch and farm workers. Unfortunately, it caught fire and burned down, so we weren't able to buy that and bring it back, but we were able to reconstruct it. So this is a reconstructed building, and it was rebuilt in 1991, I think was the year that it was rebuilt. So it did have some good use for a while. So the house you're looking at now, both through the live shot and the photo, is the Singleton general store and home. A lot of cases, a lot of people who worked here had their home and their business in the same building. They could do that. They also ran the post office. So 2/3 of their house was used for their store, and you could buy all general merchandise from clothing to flour, salt, children's items, things like that, oil lamps. Again, basically general items that you would need for your home. They ran the post office. No zip codes back in those days, so the train came, delivered the mail to Allensworth, California. Now, Henry Singleton lived here with his parents. He was the youngest of the 3 Singleton children, and he would get the mail, bring it here. It would then be sorted and put into P.O. box, or kind of like P.O. boxes here in the store. So people would then come and get their mail here. The zip code didn't become something that we used until the 1960s. So if you wanted your mail to Allensworth, you just dated it Allensworth, or excuse me, labeled it Allensworth, and it would find it here. The Singletons lived here periodically between 1910. They did have to leave around 1916 for a while, that they did come back, and then they stayed here. Henry went off to college. Mr. Singleton, Joshua Singleton, passed away in 1927, and Henrietta Singleton passed away in 1930. Again, you're looking towards the south, again in the live shot there. Open expanse. There weren't that many homes. People think that there was a lot more homes than what we're showing, but there really wasn't. This was open land. Some of it was purchased and never used. Some of it was just never purchased, with the hope that more people would come into Allensworth and buy property and start building up. Another thing, we're going to kind of pan around, Laura, if that's okay. Oscar O'Vare had some property here just to the north of the road we're walking on, and they called it a demonstration garden. So this little fence area that you're seeing is kind of a replica of that, but that's not where the location was at. And he did grow some vegetables here as people were start moving in those early days, to show the different types of crops that you could grow here living in Allensworth on what you needed for your family. And again, you can see a nice BNSF, as we call it, much easier than saying Burlington Northern Santa Fe rail lines here. Again, there's always been 2 sets of tracks because we had that siding for that large warehouse. Now it's used kind of as a passing lane. So anytime that there's a hotter or more that freight that needs to get somewhere faster than others, a lot of times they stop the train here in order for something to go by. So it could be a passenger train like Amtrak. And we talked about our rededication on Saturday. We're actually going to have Amtrak stop here. We are a whistle stop several times, so people can ride the train down and get off here and come to the park. So right now they're waiting for somebody to pass. The house you see behind me is the Hinman home. They were one of the few families that had their store, their business, and their home in separate buildings. So the Hinman home is one of our originals, and it looks very similar to the Smith house. And so they were probably constructed around the same time. Although the Hinman home was reconstructed. Again, it was still standing, so they had to do cosmetic work to it, but probably in the late 80s is when that home was reconstructed. Now their store, the Heisman and Company General Store, Zebedee Heisman ran his store. They built it first, 1911, and then he was also a notary public and the realtor. He had his realtor license from a business out from New York, and so he helped people buy land here in Allensworth. They were the longest staying store, the longest staying pioneer. Zebedee Heisman stayed here from 1911 to 1950 when he passed away. They ran the library here for a short period of time in the 40s when the library building closed up. And again, general merchandise store is what he had. So the photo you're looking at is from the front. Now you'll notice those are all windows. They are all east-facing windows. And in the summertime, this building gets at least 5-10 degrees warmer than the outside, than everything else. So when we are a nice, balmy 110 degrees out here in the sun, it's a nice 115 to 120 inside this store. Don't back up anymore. So let's go inside. All right, let's see. Let's come inside here. Luckily, it is not 120 degrees in here right now. So coming through, you can see those windows from the inside. But this is a fantastic store. It is one of only of two-story buildings, and actually, I think it's almost a little bigger than 2 stories. The Heismans actually lived for just a few months up in the loft, but if they did that during the summertime, now we know why they have a separate house outside, because it is just really, really hot inside here. But again, all manners of merchandise, from your farm equipment in one corner that you could take care of your chickens, your livestock, to getting to more of your housekeeping. I showed you the Bissell carpet sweeper. Well, here's the earlier form of that. This is your carpet beater or your rug beater. So that you would just take your carpet outside, your rug outside, and beat it. This was a great thing for all those children that said, I'm bored. So mom would give them this and have them go beat on a carpet. You have your cleaning supplies of varying degrees. And then around on the far side, again, a matter of sundries, a lot of items that you might recognize. X-Lax is something that's been around for a number of years, but also in our cases, you have Ghirardelli chocolate, Lipton, iced tea, maybe some Folgers coffee. So again, items that you would recognize today. Scales that were used when you got large, they would get 100-pound bags of coffee beans, because you roasted your own, ground your own. So you could make them into smaller 1 or 5 pound bags if necessary. So anything necessary that you needed, the Heismans could probably get.
That concludes the tour portion of our program, but if anyone has any questions, we'd be happy to answer any questions. And then we wanted to share a couple other items when we're done here.
All right, thank you both so much. And Emily Mackinson, have we had any questions come in yet? If anyone has additional questions, put them in the Q&A section.
Yes, Emily B., thank you so much. And thank you so much to Lori and Jerelyn. We have several questions in the chat box, in the Q&A box now. If you have additional questions, please feel free to submit them. Let's see. So I think I heard you mention that at the time period you're describing, there was about 2,000 people living in the town? Was this the peak of the population in Allensworth, or when was the peak and how many people were there?
So there were 200 people.
200.
Probably the peak of the town of Allensworth is actually today. So there is still a portion of the town of Allensworth that exists, and it is south of the park. There's about 600 people that live in the community today. But during historic times, the peak was about 200 people. And Allensworth was part of a Black town movement throughout the United States. There were hundreds of Black towns. And there were also things called utopian colonies. So not too far from here, by a town called Lerdo, there was a Mennonite community. There was also what's labeled on historic maps as a Mexican colony by the town of Shafter, which again is a farming community in the Central Valley, a little bit closer to Bakersfield though.
Okay, wow. And then you did say something about the population decreasing in the 1960s. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the reasons for that?
So there were fluctuations in the population throughout.
Well, we were not able to restore the connection. Lori and Jerelyn were able to answer your questions via email. Everyone who registered will receive the replies. In addition, we will read the questions and answers aloud now for everyone viewing this recording. Okay. So, Emily Mackinson, did we receive any good questions here to answer?
We did. We received quite a few excellent questions. And I will go ahead and jump in with the first one. So, how big is Allensworth State Park? It looks like there is a lot of walking required in visiting the park. Are there any accessibility options for those who have difficulty doing a lot of walking?
That is a great question. So here's what Lori and Jerelyn have to say. The historic core of the park is approximately 240 acres. To walk to each of the buildings, it could be about a mile to a mile and a half of walking. Visitors can drive through the park and stop at each building for those who have difficulty walking. The roadways are paved and the area is level. There are also ramps at each building for people to use. All right.
Excellent. That's great to know. So did Allensworth have a local government, and how was it organized?
Okay, so Lori and Jerelyn say that there was an elected constable, basically the sheriff, and a justice of the peace, but they did not have a mayor. Members of the community served on the school board, the water board, the Women's Improvement Club, and the cemetery board.
Did Allensworth have its own newspaper?
No, although the colonel did use the Sentiment Maker as a publication to encourage for military men to settle in Allensworth. And I would like to know more about that too.
Wow,
All right.
interesting.
Yeah, what's our next question?
Why did the library close in the 1940s?
With the declining population of the community, there were not enough people to warrant keeping it open. Oh, that's too bad.
This question seems like it's related to the previous one. Why did the population decline in the 1960s?
All right, Lori and Jerelyn say, the Allensworth population started its decline in the 1920s. The United States population moved to urban areas after World War I for better job opportunities in cities. The people who left didn't move back to Allensworth or to that general area. The 1960s was the lowest population, but the area was never abandoned. There are currently approximately 600 people residing in Allensworth south of the park. So there's still quite a few there.
Yeah, for sure. How many of the buildings are original and not reconstructed? Are there plans to reconstruct additional buildings?
Ooh, very good question. They say that 7 of the 20 buildings have some original material in them. The rest are total reconstructions, and the buildings are all reconstructed on their original properties, right where they were the first time around.
Another question about reconstruction. Since the barber shop was made of concrete, is it the original building or also a reconstruction?
Let's see. They say that the barbershop, is a total reconstruction. Frank Milner constructed his shop/home of concrete, and the park reconstructed the building similar to what it would have looked like at the time Mr. Milner lived there.
Continuing on with questions about buildings, photos of the Allensworth home seem to have at least a partial second story with a peaked roof, but the reconstruction doesn't. Why is that?
Very interesting question. So Lori and Jerelyn say that the reconstruction does actually have the peaked roof above the dining room. Maybe we just couldn't see it from that angle. The area above the dining room was a loft in the original construction.
Who took the historical photographs of the buildings?
They say that the photographs came from different sources, including some of the former residents of Allensworth. Some photographs might have been from newspapers or from private collections.
Okay. What was the source of water for the gardens and for the people in the town?
That's always a good question in California, isn't it? They say that water was from 4 wells located north of the town.
How functional was Lake Tulare when the people were there? And did they have to deal with crops or with floods or crop loss, etc.?
Good historical question. They say that most of Cherry Lake was already gone by the time Allensworth was settled. There was always the possibility of flooding, but not many accounts have been documented. There was a drought in the mid-1910s, which would have prevented flooding at the time.
All right, yes, interesting.
Yeah.
So, of course, down there in the Central Valley, the town gets very hot in the summer, as they mentioned in the presentation, and cold and wet in the winter as well. And then someone wanted to know, is it very windy in the area?
Oh, yes. Good question, especially for everyone wanting to travel there. Lori and Jerelyn say that, yes, there is wind here almost every day. With some of the bigger storms, the wind can reach gale forces and create large dust clouds. Okay, so yeah, I guess check the forecast before you head out.
Indeed. Another patron wanted to know if the town was damaged by the storms that occurred earlier this year.
I think that's probably something we were all asking. Luckily, they say that no, it was not. The town was just fine this year.
That's very fortunate.
Yeah.
Several times in the presentation, they talked about the train in Allensworth. Does the train still stop in Allensworth?
Yes. So they say that yes, for special events where a minimum number of Amtrak tickets are sold, the train will stop in Allensworth. They are considered a whistle stop. Amtrak will stop for special occasions like the rededication celebration, which they just had, which it arranges with the Friends of Allensworth, their nonprofit cooperating association. If you have a group, you can also arrange for Amtrak to stop, but there are several criteria that need to be met before Amtrak and the railway will stop at Allensworth.
That'd be a really fun way to visit, I think. Take the train
It
down
really
there.
would. Yeah.
Is this state historic park open to visit year-round? What are the best times of year to visit?
That's a very good question. Yes, it is. It's open year-round, and the best time to visit is spring and fall. The weather is better at those times of year, but people do visit year-round. So, yeah, hey, it's fall right now. Might be a good time.
Yeah, great little day trip. Let's see. Another patron mentioned, I visited a few years ago and everything was closed up. When are the windows and doors open? Can you go inside the buildings?
That's a really good question for anyone planning to visit. They say that the park is set up as a self-guided tour. There needs to be someone in the buildings at all times for them to be opened during special events. During a self-guided tour, you can peek into the windows to view the building's interiors. There is also an audio tour that you can use your cell phone to access, so you can get that extra information as you're walking around. You can also call the park in advance to arrange for a guided tour by park staff. The guided tour will take you into some of those buildings so you can get that experience.
Oh, nice. How is the new visitor center progressing? Is there a gift shop at the State Historic Park? And does it have books about Allensworth?
Yes. So according to Lori and Jerelyn, the future visitor center project is still in the planning phase of development. Some of the environmental studies have been completed. The Friends of Allensworth operate a gift shop in the Singleton store during special events. They do sell books in the gift shop. Also, for the rest of the time, the Friends of Allensworth also has an online gift shop at www.friendsofallensworth.org.
All
I'm going to have to
right.
check that out.
Yeah, sounds really interesting. Can you camp overnight at the park?
Oh, yeah, that'll be good to know, especially if you're coming from a bit farther away. Yes, there is a campground with 16 sites. One campsite has hookups. The campground can be reserved at reservecalifornia.com. We also allow first come, first serve camping. The campground has bathrooms and showers available. Oh, sounds like you'd be all set there.
That sounds really nice. I think I recall Lori or Jerelyn saying that there's some beautiful stars. You can really see the night sky out there away from some of the bigger towns.
Yeah, that sounded really fun.
Yeah. What do you hope visitors will take away from their experiences visiting Allensworth?
All right. So Lori and Jerelyn hope that visitors will take away an enjoyable time learning about a unique park that honors a forward-thinking community of self-reliant citizens who wanted freedom from discrimination and to make their own choices to create the American dream. That really sounds like a meaningful trip there.
Indeed. It looks like we're coming up to our last question. This patron wanted to know, is there a sign-up list to be alerted to future tours, events, or updates about the park?
And there isn't a sign-up list at present, but you can find more information on the park's website at www.parks.ca.gov/? page_ID = 583. And we will have this linked in the description underneath the video. So you can just click on it, and events are listed on that page along with information on the variety of tours available at the park. So that self-guided tour, getting the park's staff to do the tour, so you can figure out what will work for your trip.
Excellent. Well, I think that's all the questions that we had time for from the patrons. And I'm so glad that we got to get some answers from Lori and Jerelyn to get these questions answered for you.
I am too. Everyone had such good questions. I think that was, it was a great tour, and yeah, I'm so glad people asked all those things so I could get the answers.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So thank you again to Lori Wear and Jerelyn Oliveira for their wonderful tour of Colonel Allensworth State Historic Park. Thank you to Emily Mackinson for monitoring our Q&A, and thank you all for watching. If you're ever in Sacramento, you can visit the California State Library at 914 Capitol Mall, Monday through Friday from 9:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. You can also send us questions via phone, email, and the Ask a Librarian web form on our website. Don't forget to go to your local public library and check out a California State Library Parks Pass so that you can get free vehicle day use entry to the many participating state parks, including Colonel Allensworth State Historic Park. In addition, fourth graders and their families can get a California State Parks, the California Adventure Pass, which allows free entry to 19 state parks. Thank you all so much for being here, and we hope to see you at future events.